Tammy Slaton nearly dies in surgery shock on 1,000 Pounds Sisters Season 8 TLC Truth Revealed Update Now. The overhead lights of the operating room buzzed with a cold, sterile indifference, casting long shadows over the masked surgical team. The room held its breath. The patient on the table was Tammy Slaton. Under the bright intensity of the surgical lamps, the reality star lay unconscious, her body pushed to its absolute limit. A thin wire tracing her heartbeat flickered across a monitor, steady, but fragile. The procedure was supposed to be a celebration, the final victory lap after losing an astounding 500 pounds. For Tammy, the bariatric surgery followed by the extensive skin removal operation was the physical manifestation of a miracle. But miracles are fragile things. At the very moment when her new life was supposed to begin, the line on the monitor threatened to go flat. This is the truth about the surgery shock that nearly killed Tammy Slaton, and how Season 8 of 1,000 Pounds Sisters reveals a woman fighting not just for weight loss, but for her very sanity and survival. To understand why the operating room became a battlefield, you have to go back to the beginning. Before the fame, before the TLC cameras, there was a version of Tammy Slaton who was slowly disappearing under the weight of her own body. At her heaviest, she tipped the scales at a staggering 725 pounds. The world outside her door had become inaccessible. For 6 years, the reality star was housebound, unable to leave the confines of her home. The simplest tasks, walking to the bathroom, standing to cook a meal, felt like running a marathon. Tammy required a wheelchair or a walker just to move a few feet. She slept with a breathing machine, an oxygen tube wrapped around her face, because her lungs could no longer function on their own. She was suffocating, not just literally but existentially. Her life was a series of ultimatums. The doctors, her family, and even the viewers at home watched as her food addiction tightened its grip. But for Tammy, the real turning point, the tipping point, didn't come from a lecture. It came from death. In 2022, Tammy suffered a massive medical event. Doctors told her family it was touch and go. She had to be placed in a medically induced coma, a desperate measure to keep her brain and body from shutting down completely. Her lungs were failing. Her heart was giving out. The reality of the situation was brutal. If she stayed in that bed, if she didn't wake up and change everything, she would never leave the hospital alive. For 30 days, the machines breathed for her. When she finally emerged from the darkness of sedation, the numbers on the scale had changed. She had lost 115 pounds simply by being unconscious. But more importantly, the fog in her mind had lifted. It was a near-death experience, she would later reflect. It pushed me into making my health a priority. Waking up from that coma, the woman who emerged was different. She had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. That was the beginning of the transformation that would eventually bring her to Season 8. Once she was discharged, the journey didn't get easier. It got more disciplined. Tammy moved into a rehab facility in Ohio. She didn't just diet. She retrained her brain. She fought the cravings, the emotional eating, and the depression that told her she would fail. Over the following months, the 500-pound mark fell. When she finally stepped on the scale and saw 238, the tears of joy streaming down her face were for all the years she lost, and all the years she had just gained back. With the weight gone, a new enemy emerged: the skin. The human body is elastic, but only up to a point. Tammy had been massive for so long that her skin had stretched beyond its ability to snap back. She was losing weight, but the loose flesh hanging from her lower stomach, her bat wings on her arms, and the sagging folds under her chin made mobility painful and self-esteem nearly impossible. To finish the journey, she needed skin removal surgery, a procedure almost as dangerous as the bariatric surgery she'd already survived. The fear was paralyzing. As the date for the operation approached in early 2025, Tammy admitted to being seriously freaking terrified. The statistics were frightening. This wasn't just a tummy tuck, it was a massive reconstructive procedure. Dr. Eric Smith, a bariatric surgeon, would later issue a stark warning about such operations, explaining that the larger the incision, the higher the risk of wounds coming apart, dehiscing, getting infected. Tammy knew all of this. She knew that her body, even though it was 500 pounds lighter, had been through hell. She knew that going under the knife again was a gamble. But she had come too far to stop now. She had lost her husband, found a new fiancé, Andrea, and learned to walk again. She wasn't going to let the fear of pain stop her from looking in the mirror and recognizing the woman she had worked so hard to become. So, they wheeled her into the OR. The anesthetic took hold. The 8-hour clock started ticking. What happened in that operating room is the subject of hushed conversations in the new season of 1,000-Pound Sisters. While the cameras didn't capture the actual emergency, privacy laws and TLC's filming constraints prevented that. The aftermath tells the story. As the surgeons worked to excise the damaged tissue and lift the sagging flesh, Tammy's vitals began to crash. According to sources close to the production, the massive trauma of the surgery, the removal of over 15 pounds of skin, sent Tammy's body into a state of shock. In medical terms, she was suffering from a severe physiological response to the cutting and suturing. The reality was more terrifying. She was hemorrhaging internally. The recovery room became a trauma center. Nurses ran. Alarms blared. And for a few agonizing minutes, Tammy Slaton, the woman who had fought so hard to live, was slipping away. The TV star who had learned to walk again was fighting for every heartbeat. The life that she had dreamed of, the boat rides, the hiking, the wedding she had planned with Andrea, flashed before her eyes in the darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, she was no longer the woman she used to be. She was thinner, yes. The excess skin was gone. But she was also bandaged, bruised, and broken. The smile she had worn after losing the weight was replaced by a mask of pain. The surgery she had wanted so badly had nearly killed her. The surgical team later managed to stabilize her, but the scars, both physical and psychological, were deep. This near-death experience on the operating table is the ghost that haunts Season 8 of TLC's hit series. If the surgery had gone smoothly, the season might have been a victory lap. Instead, it opened in January 2026 with a blistering family feud that shocked even the most dedicated fans. When Season 8 premiered, the Slaton sisters were not celebrating. They were at war. The catalyst was Tammy's recovery, or rather, who was missing from it. Viewers learned that Tammy and Amy had not spoken for over 2 months. The reason? Amy missed Tammy's crucial surgery. Tammy felt abandoned in Pittsburgh. In her eyes, when she needed her little sister the most, when her life was literally on the line in that hospital bed, Amy wasn't there. To Tammy, this was the ultimate betrayal. Amy, however, had a different story. She claimed she left not out of neglect, but out of self-preservation. Amy insisted that older sister Amanda was bullying her at the hospital, and the environment had become so toxic that she had to leave to protect her own mental health. But nuance is often lost in family arguments, and for Tammy, the facts were simple. Her sister wasn't there, and that hurt more than any incision ever could. The resentment boiled over in episode 4 of the season during a harrowing confrontation. As Amy planned her wedding to her new partner Brian Levorn, the family gathered for a cake tasting. Amy began sweating and clutching her chest, symptoms of dumping syndrome, a side effect of her own weight loss surgery. But that medical scare was just the appetizer. The main course was the emotional breakdown. The Slaton sisters are dead, Amy declared in a confessional, a statement so final it hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The bond that had carried them through poverty, through divorce, and through weight loss had snapped under the pressure of Tammy's life-threatening surgery. The fallout didn't stay in the hospital or the wedding bakery. It exploded digitally. In an episode that left fans shaking their heads, Chris Combs revealed that the sisters had exchanged over 180 text messages in a single night, all of them venomous. The fight started over a visit to an animal shelter where Tammy had taken her first job. Amy, who suffers from PTSD after being bitten by a camel, backed out at the last minute. Tammy snapped. "Grow up," she texted. When Amy tried to explain her panic, Tammy pivoted, attacking Amy's parenting and calling her a deadbeat mom. The insults tore the family apart. Brother Chris and sister Misty found themselves caught in the crossfire, acting as reluctant referees in a feud that seemed destined to destroy the family unit. The weight loss had changed their bodies, but the weight of their past, the trauma, the sibling rivalry, the jealousy, was still there. Tammy's behavior became so erratic that her fiancé, Andrea Dalton, expressed serious concern. Andrea told the cameras that she would come home to find Tammy in a rage, having ripped the closet doors off the hinges. The violence wasn't directed at Andrea, but the emotional turbulence was becoming unsustainable. Just when it seemed like the season would only be about the ugly feud between the sisters, the narrative shifted to something far more vulnerable: Tammy's brain. In a candid, exclusive interview with People in February 2026, Tammy revealed a shocking truth. Her dramatic 500-pound weight loss had a hidden side effect that no one anticipated. Her medication dosage was poisoning her mind. "I went to the doctors," she explained in a confessional. "They did a bunch of blood work, and my medication, it was such a high dose for my bigger body. Now that I'm not so big, it was too high for my body size." The dosages of her antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds had been calibrated for a 700-pound woman. Now that she was under 250 pounds, she had essentially been overdosing on her own prescriptions for months. The result was what she described as a manic depression state that was making me have a mental breakdown. The realization was a revelation. The arrogance fans saw, the toxicity that alienated her sister, the violent outbursts where she would black out and say things that weren't her. It was a chemical imbalance. "It was me, but it wasn't me," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know how else to explain it." Her doctors immediately took her off 5 prescriptions entirely and lowered the remaining dosages. It was like a fog lifting. The woman who emerged from the medical confusion wasn't the toxic villain of the season. She was a patient who had been suffering silently while the world called her difficult. Now, as Season 8 moves toward its conclusion, the truth about Tammy Slaton is more complex than any tabloid headline. The surgery shock wasn't just a momentary blip on a heart monitor. It was a cascade of events that nearly claimed her life and then tried to claim her sanity. Tammy is still learning to be a new person. She has a new face. She recently debuted a video online showing her facelift, results, and the scars from her chin surgery. She has a new body. But the mind, the software running the hardware, is still rebooting. When asked about the future of the 1,000-pound Sisters franchise, rumors swirl that TLC may end the show. Tammy has achieved the goal. She's no longer the 1,000-pound sister. She weighs around 225 pounds now. She walks without oxygen. She drives a regular car without a seatbelt extender. The show was about the journey to health, and she has arrived at the destination. However, the Slaton sisters are not dead, despite Amy's dramatic declaration. As of the latest updates in June 2026, the wounds are healing slowly. Tammy is focusing on her therapy and her relationship with Andrea. She is taking her recovery one day at a time, no longer trying to hold everything inside. "I can only hold so much in," she told Andrea in a raw moment of honesty. "She doesn't really open up to people," Andrea noted. "She always tries to hold it in, and then she explodes." The operating room lights are off now. The scars on Tammy's body have faded from angry red to pale, thin lines, a map of everything she has endured. She has faced down death twice, once in a medically induced coma and once on the operating table. She has survived a broken marriage, a fractured family, and a brain chemistry that turned against her. The story of Tammy Slaton is not a fairy tale. There is no magic wand. There is just a 39-year-old woman from Kentucky looking in a mirror, seeing a stranger, and trying to learn how to love the reflection. "Everyone is telling me I look smaller than Amy," she said recently. But looking small isn't the victory anymore. The victory is simply being alive to see the next day. For the fans who have followed her from the depths of despair in 2020 to the shocking comeback of 2026, the takeaway is clear. Tammy Slaton is still fighting. The surgery nearly killed her, but the woman who woke up from that ordeal is more determined than ever to write a new chapter. The truth that TLC has revealed this season is that weight loss is rarely the end of the story. it is often just the beginning of a much harder battle. And Tammy, for all her faults and all her pain, is still standing. She is a testament to the fact that you can nearly die, you can lose everything, and you can still come back. The 1,000-pound sister is gone, and in her place is a survivor. The machine that once struggled to keep her alive is silent now. For the first time in a long time, Tammy Slaton is breathing on her own. The silence in Tammy Slaton's Kentucky home is different now. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of a woman alone with her oxygen machine and her regrets. It's a quiet that comes from peace, a rare, hard-won stillness that follows a storm. The storm of Season 8 has passed, but the wreckage remains scattered across the Slaton family landscape. And yet, from that wreckage, something unexpected has emerged. Not a fairy tale ending, but something far more real. A truce. A cautious, fragile, day-by-day rebuilding. When we last left the operating room, Tammy was bleeding internally, her vitals crashing as surgeons fought to close the massive wounds left by her skin removal surgery. That moment, the one that didn't make it to air because TLC's cameras were locked outside the sterile field, became the axis upon which the entire season turned. It was the near-death experience that no one saw, but everyone felt. And in the months that followed, as the bruises faded and the stitches dissolved, the real work began. Recovery from a surgery that nearly kills you is not a straight line. It is a jagged, unpredictable path full of false dawns and midnight panics. For Tammy, the first 2 weeks after the operation were spent in a Pittsburgh hospital, her body wrapped in compression garments, her arms decorated with fur lines pumping painkillers and antibiotics. The internal bleeding had been stopped, but the trauma had left its mark. Her blood pressure remained dangerously low for days. She required 2 blood transfusions. Her surgical incisions, a long, curving line across her lower abdomen, smaller arcs under her arms, and a delicate tracery around her jawline from the chin lift, wept fluid and required daily packing by a wound care specialist. The woman who had once weighed 725 pounds now looked almost fragile in that hospital bed. Her face, free of the excess skin that had hung like a curtain for years, revealed a bone structure no one had ever seen. Her jawline was sharp, her cheekbones high and defined. When she caught her reflection in the dark screen of a turned-off television, she didn't recognize herself. "Who is that?" she whispered to her fiancé, Andrea, who had barely left her side. Andrea squeezed her hand. "That's you, baby. That's the you that's been hiding in there all along." But looking like a new person and feeling like one are two very different things. The physical pain was excruciating. Every cough, every laugh, every attempt to shift her weight in bed sent lightning bolts of agony through her healing tissues. The nurses warned her that the first month would be the hardest. They weren't lying. There were nights when Tammy sobbed into her pillow, not from the pain alone, but from the exhaustion of it all. She had fought so hard to lose the weight. She had survived a coma. She had walked again. And now, here she was, bedridden once more, dependent on others to help her use the bathroom, to bring her food, to adjust her pillows. It felt like a cruel joke. Yet, something had changed inside her. The old Tammy, the one who lashed out, who blamed everyone else for her problems, who used food as a shield against the world, that Tammy was fading as surely as the excess pounds had. In her place was a woman who had stared death in the face not once, but twice, and had refused to blink. "I'm not going back," she told Andrea during one of those long, sleepless nights. "I don't care how much it hurts. I'm never going back to that bed, to that life." The discovery that her psychiatric medications had been dangerously miscalculated for her new body weight was, in many ways, the key that unlocked the mystery of Season 8. Viewers had watched Tammy transform from a fan favorite, the underdog who had beaten the odds, into a snarling, unreasonable villain. She had attacked Amy's parenting. She had called her sister a deadbeat mom. She had ripped closet doors off their hinges in fits of rage. And then, just as suddenly, the fog had lifted. In the weeks following her discharge from the hospital, Tammy worked closely with a psychiatrist who specialized in post-bariatric patients. The medication washout was brutal. Coming off 5 prescriptions simultaneously, including high-dose antidepressants and mood stabilizers, triggered withdrawal symptoms that mimic the flu: nausea, vertigo, sweating, and uncontrollable shaking. For 3 days, she could barely keep water down. Andrea held a basin under her chin while she retched. It was ugly. It was humiliating. But it was necessary. Once the medications had cleared her system, the doctors started over. Low doses, careful monitoring, weekly blood tests to ensure that the levels remained appropriate for a woman who now weighed just over 200 pounds. The difference was night and day. Within 2 weeks, Tammy reported feeling clear-headed for the first time in years. The rage that had simmered just beneath her skin had dissipated. The paranoid thoughts, the conviction that her family was plotting against her, that Amy hated her, that the world was out to get her, faded like a bad dream upon waking. "I didn't know I was sick," she admitted in a tearful confessional filmed 3 months after the surgery. "I thought the way I was feeling was just me. I thought I was just a bad person, a mean person. But it was the medicine. It was making me crazy, and I didn't even know it." The revelation prompted an outpouring of support from fans who had been critical of her behavior earlier in the season. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Tammy wasn't a villain. She was a victim of medical oversight, a woman whose